Welcome back to another episode of
Just
a
a
Squirrel,
squirrel
looking for a
for
nut,
a nut,
trying to get out
of
this rut.
So this is the one word that we have yet to finesse, but we will get there. I was dreaming about that just the other night. But before we talk about that dream, Oleg, I want to tell you about a dream I had the other night. This one is a little weird. Be prepared. So I live in a studio apartment in New York City, and the building that I live in was built clear back in the 1800s, so it was old. But let's face it, this is New York City. And in the dream, I woke up, and there were harnesses and strings that were attached to the ceiling. So I got in it, and I put them underneath my armpits, because when I stepped out of the bed, the floor was full of roaches, and some of them were big. Some of them were as big as this cup. Others were little, but everywhere there were roaches. And when I put my foot down, the heel of my foot, when I got out of bed, before I put the harnesses on, it crushed a roach. So I got into the harness, and then I jumped up and down. And every time I came down and landed on the floor, I squashed another roach. And I would see more and more roaches, and they were bigger and bigger and bigger. And then eventually, startled, I woke up. What on earth was I thinking about? And what if that dream was reality, and this right now is my dream? Oh, like, what do you have you ever had a dream like that?
No, not.
You haven't?
Nothing close to that, so I can't really say what that means or what it might foreshadow moving forward. But I think for me, I've had similar dreams like that. Nothing exactly as you described, but I know for me, one of the fears that I have is around spiders. So
really,
yeah,
you don't think they're cute?
No, unfortunately I don't. And one of the things that I have found myself sometimes dreaming about is spiders that are literally 10 or 20 or 50 times bigger than I am.
What?
So some of the movies that you see where the insects are so much bigger than a human being.
Yeah.
I felt like I was probably a part of those movies to a degree. And dreams like that, they oftentimes wake me up in a form of panic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting to explore, as you were mentioning, to what is the grain of truth within a dream, right? Are there spiders like that exist in this world? Not that I have seen, but
please let that not be true. Yes.
Doesn't mean that it's impossible, right? Yeah. And then I also get curious about, I think when it comes to dreams, and in particular, your example of dreaming of roaches, to what degree do the actual events from the day prior influence that dream or influence that vision? You might have had a conversation with someone that described to you circumstances where roaches, and in my case, spiders, were the worst thing that a human being can come across. So I have been curious about that. I think there is a pretty large component as well when it comes to manifestation. I'd be curious to go down that rabbit hole as well. And I know that Richard Marks has joined us here as well, but manifestation, at least the visualization part, it is a somewhat dreamlike setting when you really think about manifesting one's goals or thinking or dreaming of a possible scenario or what it would look like. That in itself, I think, is a form of a dream, and something I've been trying to understand and probably try to control, because I think it's a natural tendency at least for me as a human being, to want to control the circumstances and control the way that the events take place. But I haven't fully figured out how that works and why it works the way it works. So I think it's a great question. To what degree are the dreams influenced by the events of the previous day?
Before we go any further, Richard and anyone else watching, if you have dreams you want to share with us, put them in the comments. We're talking about dreams. We're going to be sharing them. And I'll tell you this, at least in my opinion, dreams are seldom dull. I've never woken up from a dream and said, geez, that was boring. And they're images and the ideas and the mysteriousness of how they can play out and the weirdness of them is really actually something that a lot of people find fascinating. Richard says he's a dreamer, and that goes exactly as to what you were talking about, Oleg. Dreaming of the future. It's interesting, and I was thinking about that in preparation for this episode. When we envision the future, when we manifest it, or when we make plans for it even, we talk about dreaming. Oh, as Richard said here in describing himself, I'm a dreamer. Was he talking about a dreamer at night?
Yeah.
Or was he talking about a dream for the future? It's interesting that as a linguistic matter, we have chosen to conflate those terms into a single word.
Or even dreamer during the day, a daydreamer.
Yeah.
What's the difference between all of those? I would be curious to hear from Richard's perspectives, as well as anyone else's that chooses to join in right now. What is the impact that you've experienced in writing down the dreams? I personally have never is a long time, but I could actually say it never has happened. I've never written down any of my dreams to either better understand why they happened the way that they did, or what is it within that dream that was influenced by the previous events or anything like that. Do you, Scott, do you write down your dreams?
I don't, but at two different points in my life, I did. And they were very informative. The allegories that they represented, particularly in the ones that I remembered most vividly, actually did pertain to situations that were going on in my life that were very, very stressful. For instance, when I first met my husband, David, I had been in a relationship for years before that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was dumped by that person. A year after that dumping occurred, and it was a grieving period that I really wasn't over with, I met my husband, David. And he and I fell in love. And David treats me very, very well. You all may hear some clanking in the kitchen. That's because David does all the cooking in the house. He knows exactly what I like to eat, and is kind enough to make it for me. And so one of the things that was unusual and different about being with David was the extent to which I was receiving love. The relationship that I had been in previously was with someone that was very, very narcissistic. He did not give love. He expected love,
right,
but he didn't give it. And when I was recording my dreams, one night I had a dream where I was in a club and my husband David came and attacked me, and I defended myself and threw him against the wall, and he died when he hit the wall, and his corpse just went down to the ground. I was very perturbed by this dream because I thought, maybe this means I want my husband dead. Why would I want him dead? He's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And really, when I thought about it more, as someone pointed out to me, a therapist that I know said, Scott, the people in your dream reflect different, are symbolic of things in your life. It's not a direct correlation. So you throwing David against the wall didn't mean you wanted him dead. It means you wanted something in your life dead. It meant that there was a transition in your life going on. And the minute they said that, I understood the dream. It was me throwing the acceptance that I had had for a relationship without love against the wall and killing it forever. Enabling me to move into a relationship where I get love and lots of it. So yes, writing down that dream, being able to share it with someone, thinking about it as a matter of symbolism worked for me. Will I ever be able to objectively say that was what the dream meant? No, but that's what it meant to me. And it did help me move along in my life.
Do you believe that you can influence your dream by the intention that you choose to set for yourself prior to going to sleep?
I have tried that. I have heard that certain people can do it. There have been situations where I've gone to sleep right before I go to bed, I say that I want to remember something in the morning. Usually that's what it is. And I will tend to remember that thing the first thing when I wake up, but I don't know that actually impacts my dreams. I will also address something that our friend Kenny said. I have never dreamed that I am a mute. And I will never dream that I am a mute. Now, there are times that my husband has surely dreamed, or at least wished, that I would be a mute. But fortunately, his wishes never manifest themselves in my dreams. Oleg?
Yeah. So I think for me, as far as the intention goes, I've definitely tried similar things. However, what I have discovered is in setting the intention for a particular dream or for a particular answer to be found within that dream, what I have found through my own personal experience is that I've actually created so much pressure for me to be able to find that thing or to dream out that intention, where I actually had a very difficult time falling asleep to begin with. So whether it was dreaming about wanting more of X, Y, and Z, or to meet a particular person, or to resolve a particular conflict or a dispute that I might have had, I have found that it was much more difficult to fall asleep, because then I was almost like setting myself a goal or an intention to get through. And it truly was a challenge. It was actually more stressful to be able to go to sleep with an intention like that. That's why I asked that question. And for anyone that's joining, I'd be curious to hear, how do people set similar intentions within their lives that can actually help influence the dream? Because supposedly, and by no means I haven't read anything in regard to this, but one of the things that I have heard from multiple people by now is that in the dream state, there are connections that are being made that supposedly are, I don't know if impossible is the right word, but let's use it for this case, impossible to be made in the conscious state. Right?
Before I respond to that, and I think that our audience members may have things to say about that. In fact, one of them, I suspect, embedded in what he said, addresses exactly that. So I wanted to welcome someone who is one of my very favorite people, Gary Ireland. Gary Ireland, for those of you who don't know, is an excellent employment attorney, a powerhouse business person, and one of the most huge-hearted and social justice oriented individuals I know. It is a pleasure to have you in the audience tonight. And the reason why I mentioned Gary first, before I get to Richard, who has had a lot of very fascinating things to say in the comments, and Richard, do not think for 1 second that they're going unnoticed, because they ain't.
Right.
Is that when Gary said, if I have a really good one, I'll write it down in the middle of the night so I don't forget. And so what that is saying to me is, at least possibly, he understands what you're talking about, Oleg, that somewhere in the subconscious, connections are being made, or ideas are happening, or thoughts are bubbling to the surface that he might not have access to otherwise. That doesn't happen to me that much, because my dreams, when I remember them, tend to be very graphic. They tend to be very dramatic, and they actually tend to have very intense, almost horror or sci-fi elements to them consistently over and over. And so the ideas, do I come up with business ideas or things like that really through them? No, but they may send messages about either my life or my identity. And that's how I've chosen to interpret them a lot of times. Who and what am I? What phase or what part of myself am I entering into that these dreams are somehow representing? Or what part of my personality is coming through that I might be suppressing otherwise? Caleb Pearson, welcome to the show. It is good to have you back. It's always special to see you here. Richard, you shared as a couple of different dreams. Maybe the middle one is worth popping up, Oleg. I don't know what you think.
This one?
Yeah. So Richard dreamed he was packing things for a move. His old friend Mark was there. Richard Marks and Richard Mark. I don't know if I could handle you two people. He was packing for freight shipping. He also had a large wood sculpture the length of a whale, which seemed to be no problem for the shipping. And if that dream were reality, I would ask you for the name of that shipping company because they sound doggone good. I started out by rushing to pack, but realized I could take time. And there was no pressure on me to be done as fast as I thought I needed to be done. That's interesting because I never have dreams like that. My dreams always involve zombies, robbers attacking, monsters, fights, being on a dusty road to some apocalypse, a nuclear bomb going off, or a tidal wave hitting. This is interesting in its mundanity. Richard, do you have any thoughts about what that meant for you and how did it impact you when you woke up?
Does anyone ever have dreams where you are falling? For me, I have dreams where I fall down into a swirl. And oftentimes what I realize is that when that happens is the moment before I wake up. But I am curious to a degree, what does that mean for in case anyone is able to comment on an experience like that? How do you personally wake up? Like what's the last thing that happens before you actually open your eyes? Do you know?
When I'm conscious of it, when I'm in a dream state, something very startling happens in the dream. It's almost like the story comes to a critical inflection point, or where the fear level or the level of terror or the intensity is so great that I have no choice but to wake up because what will happen next is unbearable. When I was younger, I did have dreams about falling. I always woke up mid-fall, and I always heard urban legends that if you dreamed all the way to the landing of the fall, you would die. Of course,
really?
Yes. But now, look, I've got to ask, how on earth do people know that? Seriously, like, what do the dead do? Come back and say, I dreamed that all the way to the end, and then they just die again? Gabe, by the way, it's good to see you.
What'd you say? How do you stay within that setting? How do you stay within a dream when you want to stay within it, but there are other things? I don't know if I'm making sense here, but hang with me if you understand it. But how do you choose to stay within that dream in that situation when you, for example, when I'm falling down, it's oftentimes the very last thing that happens before I wake up. It's almost as if I have no other option but to wake up, open my eyes.
Do you know that you're dreaming when you dream? Gabe says he doesn't even remember his, by the way. Gabe, we'll work on that. But Oleg, do you know that you're dreaming when you dream? Do any of you all watching, Caleb, Gabe, Gary, do any of you remember, Richard, do you know that you're dreaming when it occurs?
Yes and no. Well, it's actually a really good question. I haven't thought about that. I would say yes to the degree that I know. Well, I don't know in the moment. Let me put it to you that way. I know afterwards, after reflecting upon a particular dream. Now, I don't know in the moment whether it is that I'm dreaming or I'm one of the other things I'll share briefly because it might be somehow semi-connected to this. When I was younger, probably 14, 15, 16 years old, one of the things that I used to do is I used to sleepwalk. Now,
really? What was that like?
I don't know, but I'll share with you some of the things that I used to do. So when I was living at my parents' place in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and when I was sleepwalking, what I would do is I would actually walk out of my bedroom, go down a flight of stairs, and then sometimes walk around the house, and then go back to bed. There were other times when my mom actually had to guide me back to my bed because I wasn't able to find the way. Now, I don't know what was happening during that time. Was I dreaming? Why was I sleepwalking to begin with? Was there something that I was trying to resolve? Was there someone that I was trying to talk to or to meet? So I think there have been many mysteries about elements of my past that I haven't fully discovered. Sleepwalking is one of them. Why does that happen? And what actually happens within the body when I'm doing it? And then the other part is sometimes having a harder time articulating when I'm dreaming and when I'm fully conscious. And the other part that I was curious about, that's why this topic personally is fascinating to me, is that when I think about dreams and as I was sharing earlier, setting that expectation on or intention for a particular dream. Now, you mentioned, Scott, how you have met some people that are able to do that. For me, I found it's a very difficult thing to do because it's almost like I set an expectation for myself prior to going into sleep or prior to experiencing the state of dreaming. And due to that expectation, I actually create a very high bar for being able to achieve it in my dream state. So there's a lot of pressure that gets created, which makes it that much more difficult for me to go to sleep and to dream to begin with.
Gabe asked a very specific question that maybe you want to address. And I'm glad that you asked that, Gabe. I was wondering the same thing. Then I will, while you're answering that question, just Richard, Caleb, and Gary, all of you have said things that are very interesting. And please note that I'm watching this. Oleg's watching it, and we're going to process and talk about those in a minute because you're raising some fascinating stuff. Oleg, what do you think about Gabe's question, though, before we move on?
When you are sleepwalking, are you still operating subconsciously? That's a really good question. I personally don't have an answer to it because I haven't done that in a couple years by now. Well, to be exact, at least 10 or 11 years. So it's harder for me to answer that question looking back at my past. I don't know. I don't know. I would say that if I was operating, I don't think I was operating consciously because I didn't have, at least based on the way that my mom had described it to me, I didn't have the best sense of direction when I was actually walking around. So I can't say that I was fully conscious when that thing was happening, but maybe to a degree it was subconscious. Maybe a lot of it just was based on habits. You know how sometimes, or you, Scott, or anyone that's listening, you're able to get out of bed or whatever it is, and even if you were to close your eyes, based on the fact that you have done that walk so many times by now, you can get to that same endpoint. Now, yes, you may bump into a wall here, you might knock certain things over, but to the most, at least like 90% of the time for me, I'm able to almost make the same exact walk from my bedroom to the office, to the kitchen, to X, Y, and Z, because it's become so habitual. So I wonder to what degree was I able to operate in my sleepwalking phase just strictly based on habits, strictly based on things that I've done probably thousands of times if I really think about it. I mean, how many times did I make the walk from my bedroom down the stairs to the kitchen and all these other places while I was living at home? Thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of times. So I don't know. That's a really good question. What actually is quote unquote turned on and what is turned off in that particular state?
I want to move on. Richard, Caleb, and Gary all said that at one point or another, they are aware of being in their dreams. Richard says that sometimes it is when he realizes that he wants to wake. I'm sorry. Gary said that it's when he wants to wake up. It's a disturbing part of the dream and he seems to want to escape it. Gary said something else in that post that I'm going to ask you to put up a little bit later because that is, we'll have a lot to say about that particular comment. I'll save some of that for later. Richard actually said that he is sometimes there's a bleed through between the waking and the dreaming. And then Caleb also says that he has lucid dreams. And all of those are fascinating. I've never experienced those things. I've never, to my knowledge, been aware that I'm dreaming, even to escape a frightening dream, let alone one that is lucid enough so that, which is, I understand lucid dreams to be a situation in which you're fully conscious of and even able to control your interface with the other components of the dream during the dream itself. Fascinating experiences. And
are you dreaming at that point?
I wonder. Well, it goes as to something Richard is talking about, which is to what extent then, look, assuming as a baseline here, which I know we don't always do, but let's assume that the reality that we are all in right now is the fundamental baseline reality that actually represents existence, and that dreams represent one of two things. either a purely internal brain modality or some sort of connection with something else. In either case, they are separate from our traditionally perceived version of reality. If that's the case, then if you're able to be lucid in a dream or interact with it, or if they're bleeding into one or the other, my question is, to what extent does this even call into effect the fundamental nature of what we consider reality or not? And I know I'm getting totally rabbit hole-ish here and all sorts of weird physics and crazy stuff. It sounds crazy, but it does
But it's
raise
a legitimate
that question.
question.
It is, because if you're able to interact, well, how do we know then if what defines the reality that we are in now is our ability to interact with it, the memories that we carry forward with it, the relationships, the mutual understandings, the tactile nature of what we're operating in. If you're interacting with the dreams that you are having, how are they not reality? Then what does distinguish them from anything else? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Gary, please, again, I want to hold on to this remark Gary had, though, about the changes in his dreams. That was an amazing thing that I want to address. But let's address this other issue first.
So I think for me, I'm probably in a similar boat where I personally have a hard time in telling a difference between what is the reality and when am I dreaming. How I choose to go about it is I don't actually choose to question whether or not I'm dreaming right now, because that might lead me to a whole rabbit hole that I have no answers to. But then the other component of what you just described, as far as the memories and everything that we carry with us, the other thing that fascinates me is this concept of telepathy. So once again, based on my knowledge, but I'm thinking of having a conversation with you, and then literally within the next however many seconds to minutes, you end up giving me a call. What are the chances? So that's where I think there is something interesting that probably happens between the two, that dream state and then that form of reality that I'm able to experience now. And maybe at the end of the day, it's all just one big thing, and it's much harder to actually draw the line and understand the difference between the two. Because even in the concept that you just described, or Caleb's, his ability to witness the dream, almost like be an observer of it, that to me, I'm sure I might have experienced something like that before, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I have a hard time wrapping my head around it, because I don't truly understand what that would even mean.
Caleb did have a succinct explanation as to how he distinguishes the dream, quote unquote, reality from our actual reality. And that makes sense to me, Caleb. Thank you for putting that out there, because I would never come up with that on my own, heaven knows. Going back to Gary Ireland's 737 remark, if we may, I'm going to share something. I want to thank you so much for sharing that, Gary. One of the most beautiful things about the show, and one of the reasons I feel so passionately about it, is that people have brought to the table and shared in this community here some amazing things. And they've also unlocked memories in other participants in this experience, or unleashed emotions, or changed frameworks in ways that they may never appreciate. Winnie, I also want to say hi to you real quick. Gary's remark reminds me of, and is akin to something, and since he shared it, I'm going to share this too. I've never shared this publicly. When I was in college, and this is a painful memory, I had a friend named Judy. Judy was a butch lesbian. She and I instantly hit it off. She was just such a fun, warm personality. She was great at soccer. We'd go to clubs together. I could tell her anything, and she was a free spirit, and she laughed easily. And her parents did not appreciate her lesbianism, and they made that very clear. And during my sophomore year, after she came back, she went and spent time in Europe, where apparently it was more liberated and where she felt freedom. When she came back, she never returned to college. From what I've been able to gather, facing her life was no longer tenable. And so she put herself in her garage, turned on the ignition of her car, and killed herself through asphyxiation. She gassed herself to death, basically. I was devastated. In fact, there's a part of me today that still is heartbroken because of what happened to my beloved Judy. And at the time, I didn't have the maturity or the emotional skills to deal with it. I was never late with a paper that I submitted, Oleg. I never turned in an assignment that was less than well done. I never missed classes. But for a period afterwards, I just couldn't do the papers. I'd never had that happen before. I was obsessed with it. I also had been raised in a Christian household where the dominant thinking was that people that committed suicide went to hell. And in fact, there was a book, I think it was called The Bridge to Telepathy, that was popular when I was a young kid. And it involved a young girl who killed herself. And there was a dialogue in the background of the whole story about whether people that killed themselves without, or who didn't have certain religious beliefs, which this girl didn't, would go to hell, and she had not converted to the right religion before her suicide. And right there was this whole thing in my background, and I was worried, would Judy, she suffered in life by being lesbian in a time and place that didn't accept it. She suffered so much, and she had probably other issues that I wasn't aware of, that she killed herself in a way that I later found out was very painful and grotesque. And I couldn't get it out of my mind. And then one night I had a dream that I remember to this day. And it may be the most impactful dream I've ever had. In it, I was at a pool hall in a bar. And I was playing pool with some other people, some friends of ours. And Judy was there. And she was having a great time. And I was having a great time with her. And as that happened, I looked at her and I said, Judy, what are you doing here? You're dead. You killed yourself. And she leaned over to me. And I, again, in my mind, I was afraid that she was in hell. And in this dream, Judy leaned over and she touched my hand. And she said, Scott, don't worry. I'm okay. And then she raised her hands up and she goes, okay, it's time to party. And as you can tell, I'm getting emotional even thinking about it. And I'm working very hard to hold it back. But I also feel I can't hold it back. And the beautiful thing about this was I woke up the next day and I wasn't worried about her anymore. I was able to do my work. I was able to go back to classes. And she had a girlfriend who I was friends with. And that girlfriend was grieving indescribably more than I was. And I told her that dream. And the girlfriend felt better because of that too. So Gary, when you share that, that to me is talking about the transformative power of dreams, how they can heal, how they can help us recover. I will never recover from the loss of Judy and knowing what happened to her and why. But I can heal because of that. And until you had that remark, even when thinking about this show, it had never occurred to me. I had forgotten about this whole thing. That is a component of dreams too. They can heal.
Wow. I can't, I personally haven't had dreams as to the one that you described. However, I have had dreams where individuals have passed. Winnie here knows one of my late uncle within the past, however many months, half a year probably by now, he had passed away, and I have had him come into my dreams from time to time, but the times I remember he came into my dream, it was all based on things that him and I used to do. One of those was being able to talk on the phone for however long, sometimes hours, about literally everything on the face of the earth. But it's interesting that you mentioned the concept of being able to see your friend in this happy state. I think I'm the same exact way. I would say actually in most situations, my dreams are in that form. Very rarely do I experience situations where the individual is unhappy or sad or depressed or some of these other emotions. It most oftentimes is some form of happiness or joy that they come in. And I don't know why that happens. I don't know why it's like that, because if anything that I've learned about life, it's that it's a combination of everything. Just like I have good days, I also have days when they're not so great. I have days when I'm completely upbeat. I have days when I'm completely down. But in dream state, what I've observed is that many of the situations where there are other people involved, 99% of the time, they're always happy and full of joy. And I never fully understood why it's like that when the actual memory of the individual might tell differently.
Winnie, Gary, Richard, Marks, thank you each for those beautiful comments that you put in there. And again, Gary, I know that you're sharing stuff that is really personal there. And I thank you for that. That's the sort of thing, that's what this show is about. But I also, if we can't share this stuff, and if we can't be vulnerable like what you're saying, then we walk around in a bubble where, as you know, I'm sure full well, that the challenges that we face or these really difficult situations that dreams or other coping mechanisms or other reality intrusions or whatever we want to call them are things that are they're valleys that we walk through alone, and we don't have to be that way. And this goes as to why I made such a statement about Gary at the top of the hour. He's an extraordinary human being, but I don't want to take away either from Richard or Caleb or Winnie, all of whom are bringing Richard's remark about the spiritual planes and that sort of stuff. Thank you. That's sort of how, it's funny, Richard, what you said, I actually took at the time. That's how I understood it.
Do you look at dreams as valid memories?
Yes, I do. I understand that they're not reality, they're not memories of reality, but they are memories. I have a very strong protector instinct and protector drive.
Uh-huh.
And if someone that I view in my orbit as weaker than me or unprepared or just not as oriented in that way as I am is threatened, it's almost impossible for me not to act and act aggressively and with full force. One time I had a dream. I live, like I mentioned earlier at the top of the hour, and everyone has heard to death, I live in this 500 square foot apartment. And for a long time, I would say at least 15 years, my husband and I here lived together without a bed. We had a futon that we laid on the floor, Japanese style, and that's how we slept. And we loved it because it was firm. Our backs were always in good shape. And it was easy. We could just roll it up, and we didn't have a huge amount of space here anyway. One night I had a dream that a masked bandit snuck into our apartment, and he had on a ninja outfit where you couldn't see his face. It was black tights and all that. And he leaped over me and he started to attack David. And let me tell you, in that dream, I was attacking him. That was right in the height of my Jiu Jitsu training. I knew how to operate nunchucks really well. And let me tell you, I was on him so hard and so fast. I tore him off. I threw him down. It was like this whole thing. It was very vivid. It was very realistic. I could easily see myself doing that if that were to happen in real life. And it is an actual real memory. Is it a real memory that I confuse with the day-to-day interactions? Do I actually think that in reality or in the non-dreaming state, someone came in here and attacked David? No, or there would be a different security. mechanism in this house, I can tell you that. But it was real. It was real in what it told me about my psyche, about my personality. I know that I have this drive. It was being expressed for some reason, somehow in my dream state. It was confirming and seeing in action exactly who I am and what I will do under a certain part of me, what I'm capable of.
Do you
So
believe
yes.
Do you believe it's possible to learn a skill while dreaming?
I don't know about y'all. I have had dreams when I was doing Jiu Jitsu where I would practice. Oh, I think it is. So I would practice Jiu Jitsu. For those of you who don't know a lot about Jiu Jitsu, it is a martial art that involves basically your goal is to get someone on the ground, your opponent, and then to manipulate your body and theirs so that you put them into a submission. And you become very flexible because you learn how to move your body in all sorts of weird ways that take advantage of the other person's physical weak points to submit them. And one night, and that includes your legs, which are powerful weapon tools if you know how to use them. And one night, I was asleep and I felt David fighting me and saying, get off me. And what had happened was I had wrapped my leg in my sleep around David's torso in a submission and was tightening it. And y'all, I am strong, if I might say so myself. I've got serious man strength. I'll just put it out there. And my arm was going around him too in a move and tightening. And so clearly in the dream, and it was a legit jiu-jitsu technique, I was practicing jiu-jitsu in my sleep. Thank God David woke up. Or woke me up.
The reason why I asked that is because I've had similar situations in my life. One, I remember vividly, and it wasn't before the thing took place, but I think the dream allowed me or created a space where I was able to better understand the power to actually achieve this thing. I was in eighth. No, I might have been in high school. I must have been in high school at the time. And one of the things that we had back home is this concept of rec and ed sports. What they are essentially is recreational sports leagues that you can be a part of. So soccer, basketball, flag football, you choose. And I remember one morning, one of my friends and I, we were hanging out at my house, and he had a basketball game that morning. I wasn't supposed to play. I didn't have uniform or anything like that. So we ended up reaching out to some people from the other team, and we had asked them if they needed extra players and if they had a jersey or things like that. So here I was literally within hours of being able to find a jersey for me to play against him, use his shoes, use his shorts, his basketball socks, everything of his. And what ended up happening in that game was that it came down to literally the final seconds. I think it was 2 or 3 seconds left in the game. And one of the things that I ended up doing was I remember I caught an inbound pass and I threw a full court shot, and it went in. And at that point, the game had ended. Now, the reason why I shared that is because, and why I asked you that question as well as anyone else, is it possible to learn a skill or something like that in dream state? Is because leading up to that game, there were probably hundreds of dreams where I had a similar scenario happen. And I wonder how did that influence the actual moment? Because here's why. Most other occasions leading up to that game, when I tried to throw a full court shot, I came up at least 5 feet short. And so that's where it's just really curious to me. How was I able to use, if I could be speculating here, the things that I gained within that dream, and almost like, did the dream influence the state that I was in the present moment so much that somehow certain connections were able to be made, that all of a sudden, when I didn't feel like I had the strength to even throw the ball, that far, I actually, in a way, overthrew it to a degree because it ended up going into the basket off the backboard. So it had significantly more strength than I had pictured myself having. So that's where I think it's interesting. And I think there is, I could be wrong. Is it the Karate Kid or the Matrix? Maybe it's the Matrix, one of the two movies, where I remember the individual being able to recall all the memories of him watching different films. I think it was like, or it might have been one of the Bruce Lee films, where he was able to recall all the different films that he had watched. And all of a sudden, through dreaming and through memories, he was able to assemble different skills within his life. So that's what fascinates me about the dream state, is what actually happens and what can you really learn within that. And is it possible to experience the same level of learning, or maybe a different one, than the one that we experience in our conscious day-to-day state?
Well, one of the things that went sort of in passing under the radar of what you were just saying, Oleg, was related to something said at the end of Richard Marx's last remark. Richard Marx says that per Jung, it's related to the development of the personality, a process that is called individuation, which is an important part of our developmental staging. And I'm hearing also that these dreams that you were having are related to development of skills, which at least arguably are part of, in order to succeed at this and become known or to be able to accomplish something in it, part of your own individuation. Do you see any connection there?
I think maybe to a degree, the connection that I could see between the two is that this is something that I've pictured and imagined and probably rehearsed in my backyard. One of the things that my parents used to have for my brother and I is they had a basketball hoop in our backyard that we were able to play, I don't know how many hours, endless hours of basketball on. So I wondered, to what degree was I able to practice similar scenarios that I was experiencing within my dream state on the actual hoop. And then when the situation came about, when the actual event took place, maybe I've learned it and practiced it so many times where I was able to depend on muscle memory that I didn't even know I had.
All right. Caleb appropriately points out, with regards to the underlying question about learning, that you have to be able to recall it. And so if you're not able to recall what happens in your dream, perhaps you're not able to actually learn from it. Although what I don't know is, and I don't know that it's been fully determined from what I've read about this, and I have done a little bit of reading on it, there is not necessarily a full understanding of what truly is involved with learning being cemented in the mind. I have a question for everyone. Starting off with you, Oleg.
Yeah.
But every single person on this call or on this podcast, have any of you ever had a dream about the future that has come true? Or have any of you ever been in one of those situations where a dream appears to be perceiving something happening somewhere else? I was on a phone call with someone yesterday, and they told me that 3 times in their lives, or in their life, to my knowledge, they've only had one life. Oh, maybe they've had more. But they said that 3 times in their life, they have received a phone call from one particular relative. It was her mother, when she was in a crisis state. She lives in one state, her mother lives in another, and they're not nearby. But that 3 times when she has had extreme existential crises, her mother, who in at least one of those occasions was asleep, woke up and called her. And each time her mother said, I guess in all 3 of them, the mother would have woken up and called her, now that I think about the circumstances. In each situation, the mother said, I was asleep and had a dream that you weren't doing okay. Are you okay? While you're pondering that, go ahead.
I've had a dream. I've had this happen a couple of times where I had a dream about certain thing happening. What I mean by that, there was one dream in particular. I remember dreaming of the individual that I ended up dating. I think we dated for 2, maybe going on to 3 years. That happened partially from a dream, because I remember vividly meeting her for the first time. I was in school, and then afterwards having this set of dreams, which I think it's also pretty interesting. I think Richard Marx said, made this comment about the psychology. Here it is. He was talking about sex in dreams means a lot, and in psychology, sex dreams can often be a symbol of union. So for me, the reason why I bring that up is because I found it interesting how here's an individual that kept reappearing in my dream, and later on, it actually almost on the dot ended up becoming the relationship that I was dreaming of. I also find it interesting that sometimes, and this didn't happen all the time, because I don't think I've always lived a, I guess you could say, intentional way, in that sometimes, I wanted certain things to happen without really being able to put an intention behind it. But I have found that some of the other relationships that followed happened the same exact way. Started with a dream, started with me envisioning some form of it happening, and then down the road, I was able to actually experience it. I can't hear you, Scott.
Oops, sorry about that. Richard Marx likes your dreams, or at least likes that dream. Winnie, by the way, says she has a lot of silly dreams. I don't have silly dreams. I'm jealous of you. Those are cool dreams to have. Good for you, Winnie. Thank you for sharing that. Winnie, you say like you're driving in circles on the 405, which I assume is a highway. Are those dreams recurring? Periodically, I have a dream in which I'm in Minnesota, which is where I grew up, or which is where I went to college. And I go to a mall. And when I'm in that mall, I go into a big department store, which is some variant of Dayton's, which was a big Minneapolis department store when I was in college. And I walk through Dayton's and I'm looking for shirts and a tie. And I'm always looking for my signature slim tie, because that's the sort of tie that I like to wear. And sometimes I'll find ties or shirts in Dayton's that I like. Sometimes I'll find other clothes that I like, but I never quite find what I'm looking for, and I'll never find the right tie. So every time in this dream, there's an escalator near the men's department, and I take the escalator up, and I go through the second floor, and on the second floor, there's always a cosmetics department or something that I run through like the plague. And then I go to the back of this massive department store, and I walk through a tunnel or a corridor in the mall where there are no stores, but there's a window on the left side that I can see the parking lot. And I walked through that corridor, and then I get back to another part of this gigantic mall that's by and large empty, but it has, or empty of customers, but it has a full complement of stores. And in that store, one of those stores, which is always a 2-level store, there are ties that I like. And there's always a man there that's waiting to help me. And sometimes I go up to the second floor and I'll look at the ties. Sometimes he'll just show me the ties on the first floor. But those are the ties that I've been looking for. They're exactly what I need. And I have that dream over and over and over. I don't know what it means, but I'm curious as to whether any of you have dreams that are recurring like that, and what they mean to you.
Trying to think, do I have any recurring dreams? This is where doing a practice like Richard Mark does of being able to write down the dreams would probably be helpful for me to for me to recall them. I can't say that I have any reoccurring dreams, at least the ones that I can recall from time to time. They probably are. They probably are within my life. I think the other thing about dreams that I find interesting is that so much of it, or so many of the ones that I experience, they do depend on the previous day and the activities that took place that day, or the desires that I might have. Richard Marx had mentioned here, sort of your relationship was fulfilled desire. I now think about the dream that I had in doing the work that I do. That was a desire. That was a dream that was inspired by the films, the speeches, the videos, the people that I spoke with. How did it manifest the way that it did? I have no idea. But that was for sure, it started with a dream. And maybe in a way that was a form of a recurring dream.
Caleb had a fascinating dream that he shared with us at 8:09 p.m. Oleg, you've got to put this up. I'm just going to give everyone a second to look at it, and then I'll share a story. And yes, Caleb, I saw your comment that you love this topic. I love this topic too. I'm glad you love it. So, a friend of mine in college had a dream one time where she was in her house. She lived on a Native American reservation. And her house was that she lived in reality, and in the dream as well, was a small little ranch level house on a pretty large grass property that had a forest in the background. And in her dream, it was a summer day. And she and her mom were in the house having tea or making something in the kitchen, something mundane like that. But the kitchen was the central locale. And in the dream, they saw my friend's grandmother step out of the forest and begin to walk towards the house. And in the dream, my friend's mother said, "Shut the windows now, shut them now." So they stood up and dropped everything they were doing and slammed the kitchen windows down. And then she said, "Shut the door." And my friend in the dream went and she shut the door. And then the mother said, "Oh my God, we've forgotten the window in blah, blah, blah location." And then my friend woke up in terror. She found out that her grandmother had died that night.
Wait, back up for a second. That was a dream turned into a reality?
She dreamed that her grandmother was approaching the house.
Yeah.
That her mother told her to shut all of the windows and the doors. They did immediately. My friend and her mother then realized that they had not shut one of the windows, and my friend woke up in terror. And then she heard that her grandmother had died that night.
In real life.
Wow. In real life.
Wow. That's intense. That's a really intense scenario. It's a really good topic and something to process, because once again, to what degree are dreams a form of reality and really do influence the day-to-day living? And I don't know. I don't have any answer to that question. I personally wish that I understood more as far as why some of the things happen and how they happen. I guess for me, the other question that I was wondering as we're having this conversation is, why do we dream? Why do we dream to begin with?
I did some research on this. So there's, of course, not a consensus about what dreams are or why they exist. And there were a number of different perspectives about it. One we touched on earlier, and Richard, I think in particular, talked about psychologists or doctors or certain people in the mental health field say that it is about developing our identity or processing events in a metaphorical fashion so that we can deal with them emotionally. Some have said that I read about that they are developed as practice runs, sort of like what you were talking about, Oleg, for real life self-defense scenarios or real life situations that we might encounter. And the thinking behind that line of argument is that we know animals dream. Of course, we have no idea what they dream, but anyone who has a dog or a horse can tell you that animals do dream.
Yeah.
And what are they dreaming? In their dreams, they appear to be fighting something, or they appear to be running, or they appear to either be chasing something or escaping. So the idea is that presumably they're practicing their ability to be safe from predators or to get food. And that may have been the origin of dreams. Our minds, when they're asleep, give us an ability to develop some essential skills. Others do say that they are gateways towards other realms, those who are more spiritually inclined. And that seemed to certainly be the implication of the story that I just shared about the grandmother walking to the house from the forest. It's almost like the grandmother in the dream was the grandmother's spirit. Coming released from her body and approaching that of the living. Dreams, we all have heard about dreams that come true.
Yeah.
I've never had that happen to my knowledge, but enough people have said that that has happened to them that I have learned not to discount it. Then I read an interesting story about people who have lost the capacity to dream. So for those that argue that dreams are necessary for learning, or that another theory I read about is that they basically, your mind is cleansing itself of memories that it doesn't need anymore. And that cleansing process is visual and audio, depending on whether you have access to eyes or to visual stimulation or if you're able to hear. And
how does it determine that? Or do you determine that? Which memories you keep and which you don't?
According to this, the brain subconsciously essentially makes a decision about what's important and what's not. And it stores the long-term memories and discards short-term memories. And that process involves activation of processes in the brain that we experience as dreams. Now, the reason I raise that is, and I don't remember all of the details of the study, but I was fascinated with the subject at one point. There are people that have brain damage that are no longer able to dream because of it.
Yeah.
And the studies of those people indicate that their health isn't damaged. They don't suffer from cognitive decline. They're not unhappy or depressed or anything like that. However, they don't learn new things as well, if at all. There is an impact apparently on cognition if this study was accurate. So that again circles back to what you were talking about. Can you learn things through your dreams? Well, maybe you're not learning things, or maybe you are, but learning involves the ability to process memory. Yeah. What's important and what isn't.
Well, you and I know of at least one individual who has had that form of brain injury, and it impacted her ability to dream. In fact, I remember one time, this might have been one of the topics that we had during the Saturday Courageous Conversations that we host, but I remember one time in particular her sharing this part, and I had asked her, I said, did you dream in color after the event took place? And she said no. Her dreams were just pure black. And that, to me, it's interesting because how I experience dreams, I think for me, my dreams are very similar to the reality that I experience right now. And that is, it is almost like real life scenarios, real life situations, real life environments. And so I have a very hard time understanding what it would look like if it wasn't that. What if your dream was black and white? Or what if you couldn't see color at all, but it was simply shapes or whatever it is? So that's a very interesting topic. And once again, for me, a little bit harder to wrap my head around as far as what actually happens. And then the other thing that I wanted to take it back to, just something out of genuine curiosity from myself, and I don't know enough information about it. Do all living species dream? Do ants dream?
Do
mosquitoes
viruses dream? Right? Do bacteria dream?
What
Someone
do
tells
you
me
mean-
they don't.
What what do you need to have in order for you to have the capacity to dream?
We do know this. Outside of the most primitive, actually, I take that back. I don't like calling life primitive because I was going to say things like bacterial life. They may not be as complex as us, but I don't know if I'd call them primitive. They've adapted pretty well to our times, and they continue to adapt. And the same can go for viruses if they're even considered alive, which I know there's a controversy about.
Well,
That
wouldn't it
being
make
said-
them more complex because we don't fully understand them?
Maybe because simply we have more cells too and more diverse functions in our cells. I don't know. But be that as it may, I would imagine, I do know this. I saw a fascinating television series about the evolution of life. And it talked about the very first life that came onto land. Now, we normally, at least I normally think about the first life that came onto land as fish that later became amphibians. But it went much further back than that and talked about the invertebrate life that really were the first pioneers on land. And the point that this made was that they believed that these invertebrates, I think they were scorpions or things like that, would presumably get washed up onto land by the tides, and the tides would recede and they would stay on land and maybe lay their eggs there or whatever. But part of why they think that these species survived was that they figured out on some level or another, they were able to learn that if they were near the land, they could escape predators. Not only that, but the tides, of course, didn't take them to the exact same place every single time they went out. And the land itself changed and shifted with the seasons and with weather and winds and all that sort of stuff. And so even these primitive, quote unquote, primitive invertebrate life forms had to be able to remember to get back to the seas.
Yeah.
And how to get back there. Those that didn't, presumably, we don't know a lot about because they died. And that probably was the majority of them. But a certain subsection of them presumably knew how to do that. So at least at that phase in animal evolution, we have the capacity for memory occurring. And then I do wonder to what extent, if dreams are associated with the development of memories,
Yeah.
at some point then you would say, okay, well, that was probably the minimal threshold that a dream would be required for. And then when did they actually become, I just remember this, into I dream about this? Where do dreams originate? I did some research on brain activity during dreams. I won't lie, I don't remember all of it, and I've read this multiple times before. I just don't remember it. There are different types of dream states, and the parts of the brain involved are different depending on the type of dream states. And maybe someone in the audience or who's watching or listening knows that. Please share that if you know. But those also lead one to believe that the capacity to dream, if they are occurring in parts of the brain that other animals don't even have, then maybe those animals aren't having at least that type of dream. Although who knows if they have other types of dreams. Right, there's this idea of convergent evolution, that animals that are completely unrelated develop similar evolutionary problems to the same issues in the environment that they face. And if that's the case, for instance, an octopus has a completely different brain structure than a human being does. But it develops intelligence that appears externally, at least, very similar to animals that are mammals, that have a brain structure more akin to ours. And so if evolution forced octopi to develop certain ways of thinking to deal with the same environmental pressures that mammals do, or fish, then maybe even with a completely different brain structure, if dreams are the solution to an evolutionary problem, octopi or non-vertebrate animals altogether might have developed their own same solution to the same environmental pressures.
Do you think that one of the reasons why we as humans require a form of dreaming is because the environment is truly too complex to process if we were conscious the whole time, or awake, it's a better word?
Maybe that's at the root of this whole idea, if you accept this particular scientific theory about dreams, which is that they are processing memories and getting rid of ones that the brain subconsciously deems irrelevant. That would only be happening if the environment were too complex to hold the totality of information.
Yeah. Because if you think about the amount of information that you experience on a daily basis, outside of the number of hours where you are sleeping, it's quite a bit.
Yeah.
The number of ideas. So if you were to awake during those hours, but I guess to a degree, it also brings up another point, and that is when I dream, it's not that I don't experience new information in coming out of a dream. In fact, most times I do. Most times I experience new information as far as being able to see something in a different light, or having a different observation of something that took place, or even the connection that I had mentioned earlier of being able to connect with her to such a degree where days or weeks down the road, her and I actually ended up being in a form of a relationship, something that I desired for in dream state. So I don't know. That's a really interesting topic. How is it influencing, and what's necessary, and what does one need as far as the capacity or capability to really be able to dream?
Susan Cruz is back in the room. Susan, it is good to see you. And what you're talking about is a very poetically put description of something that we were talking about a little earlier. So thank you for sharing that. You framed it beautifully. Susan, for those of you who do not have the pleasure of knowing her, is very much an artist in her spirit. She writes poetry and it's beautiful. She has a garden that she will send those who are in her inner circles photos of, and it's a treat. It's almost like you're in some sort of medieval fairy forest. It's incredible looking at these. And it goes as to something, Susan's remarks about what dreams are, symbolic representations of problems that we might have and potential solutions that, in my eyes, would really principally come from an artist. And that is the idea of imagery, of story, of design, all being part of the dream experience. Caleb, you've shared, and we haven't had a chance to get to all of them, but some very fascinating, vividly described stories of dreams involving your brother, as well as some other things. And I really appreciate you putting that out there. I wish we could go through all of them. But one of the things that I will say about them is that they also represent a high degree of artistic vision. And I've met you on Zoom. And one of the things that struck me about you, actually, Caleb, is that you do seem to have a strong artistic bent. Richard, who has been similarly describing dreams in a very dramatic, very hard to forget style, has a strong artistic bent too. And so it makes me wonder too, if the things that make us, or for those of us that have inner artists, and I don't want to claim everyone does, we are all artists is something I don't like. Right? We've banished the word we from our vocabulary, and it's really not accurate. Not everyone is artistic, or who are any of us to say that everyone is. We don't know everyone in the whole world. But those that have artistic bents, I wonder if their connection to the dream world and their ability to immerse in it and really extract from it are different from those that may not have that artistic side.
At what point of the dream do you think imagination takes place?
In my opinion, probably from the second it starts. But I want to also, that's a weird question to ask because it raises something else. Do you ever really know when the dreams begin?
No.
That's weird. Is it not?
It is.
Caleb, Richard, Gary, Susan, do you all know when your dreams begin? And is that just me that thinks that that's bizarre?
I think I'm always kind of stuck in the middle of it. It reminds me of something that a mutual connection of ours, Thomas, had mentioned about crisis, slightly unrelated but semi-connected to this. And he was saying how oftentimes when it comes to a crisis situation, you're literally in the middle of it. You don't remember the beginning nor the end as much, but rather in the middle of the crisis taking place. And I think the same thing is, for me, the same thing is true when it comes to dreams. Now, there might be times where I prepare to dream, so I guess I can recall that. I can recall being able to put my head on the pillow and then telling myself whatever it is that I had to tell to process the day's events, or to make myself less stressful, or to experience less pressure, I think, than some of the activities that day had created in order to fall asleep. But you're right. That is a really good point. How does that dream start? What is the first thing that gets triggered? If the first memory, the first experience.
What is the beginning of the dream? A story, when we read a story, there's a beginning.
Yeah.
But I'm even beginning to ask, since we're again walking down a path.
Yeah.
Half the time, do I even know when I'm awake? Now, if I'm startled awake, then yes, I know when my awakenness begins. If I'm startled awake because of a dream or an alarm or hearing something, but just waking up after a nice, long, deep sleep, when exactly do I cross that threshold? I experience it. I don't experience it as opening my eyes and being awake. It's almost like it's a gradual sort of thing.
Yeah. I'm wide awake immediately.
Oh, really? So you're never awake with your eyes closed?
No.
I am.
I'm wide awake immediately. In fact, one other thing that I'll mention to this as you were sharing this, I think to a degree, in my opinion, this whole concept that there has to be some logical pattern behind the beginning, middle, and end to any story or any experience in life, I question that. And the reason why I question that is because when I reflect upon my own day, and I'll be curious to hear how you do this, Scott, Caleb, Richard, Winnie, Susan, and everyone else that's a part of this, there's so many events that appear to be random and they just happen. So for me, it becomes a little bit harder to identify that logical form. Like, this event happened, it triggered this, and then it triggered that. When the reality of the matter, most of my day is just a combination of quote unquote random events. I mean, what's the correlation between having one call and then you have a call that's completely different about a completely different topic in life?
At 8:28 p.m., Caleb provided some interesting data around dream analyses, saying that 65% of dream elements are associated with waking life experiences. Now, I will admit this. I love horror. And my husband likes it because he loves me. I don't know that he independently give a damn about it. But he will watch horror, and I love to watch it right before I go to bed. It doesn't really, I feel, affect my dreams whether I watch it right beforehand or not. But David does say if the horror is too intense, it will impact his dreams. It's very clear. The elements of that horror TV show up in the dreams. I dream about horror, suspense, terror, these sorts of things so often that it doesn't matter what happens during the day.
Right.
I don't experience things like that. The idea of a ninja bandit coming in and attacking my husband in the middle of the night is not anything that relates to anything that I watch on TV or have seen in a movie or, thank goodness, has ever happened in my real life. Sometimes there are elements, zombie attacks, alien invasions, those sorts of things, nuclear bombs going off, those sorts of things. Maybe they provide settings for the dreams, but they don't really drive the plot. Maybe sometimes, occasionally, a character from a television show or something like that might appear. But usually, I don't see that correlation that great. Maybe I'm an outlier. I've also read somewhere that the mind cannot conceive of a face that it's never seen. It cannot dream about a face that it's never seen.
Really?
Someone cannot paint or draw a face that they have never seen. Susan Cruz is a painter, so I'm curious.
Why is that?
Agrees with that.
So then that brings up another question about imagination. Is imagination largely influenced by the experiences that we're able to have?
It has to.
So therefore, can we truly imagine something that we haven't seen or experienced?
That's a good question.
I'm going to Caleb's comment here. Imagination, the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts. Imagination takes a very crucial role in constructing of a dream, especially once to be.
Or blue dragons. But interestingly enough, even that isn't truly going as to the extent to which our dreams can manifest something that we've never seen. Because note, everything that he says is something that exists in our culture.
Yeah.
Blue, flying
or through a film. Yeah.
Right. Can we, and would we ever dream about something that truly we have no framework for?
Yeah. You know, like, can you have a dream about what a dream of an ant would look like?
Yeah.
I wouldn't even know where to start.
As always, the conversation tonight has been revelatory and thought-provoking. If any of you have dreams about it later, I hope that you come back to whatever platform you've been participating with us on and share a little bit about that dream or how your framework or your lens through which you view the world, including the experience of dreams, has been changed. If any of you watching have not left us a review on Facebook or LinkedIn yet, please do that. We love you all the more for it. And I might even try and cook up a lucid dream about you. And it would be a good one too. Oleg, while people are dreaming and remembering tonight, why don't you tell them about some other places that they can dream about or find you at?
I love it. Well, one of the places that people could dream about is this podcast called Overcoming Odds. What this is a space for you to process some of the dreams that you've had within your life, whether it's hardships or different forms of traumatic experiences. And so that's something that we started doing however long ago by now, for going on to maybe 4 years, 3.5. And that's creating a space for people to be able to process, to help them develop different perspectives when it comes to it. The other show that I started recently called The Power of Your Story, which is a space for people to share their story. And what I mean by story is not necessarily the story of their entire life, but any story within that story. So whether it's a form of conflict that you've experienced with someone in your immediate circle, in your family, whatever that looks like, or whether it's a story about learning the different lessons that you've learned within your business or within your career, that is another space of it. But I know that those are just two places that people can dream of, and I know that those aren't the only two places that they can dream of. What else
They
can
are
people dream of,
powerful
Scott?
shows, though, Oleg. They really are. And people that have listened to them have come back and given feedback that they have completely changed the way that they view the world. And what an incredible gift to give to those that listen or watch you. Kimmy. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, what else can people dream of, Scott?
They can dream of a trip down Scott Mason's Purpose Highway at purposehighway.com. That is my podcast where I share stories of entrepreneurs and great thinkers who have connected to our higher purpose to build a better self and a better world. It comes out on my LinkedIn channel, on Facebook, on Instagram every Wednesday or once a week, and we are thrilled about the guests that we have had. I also am the host of Toastmasters District 46's website, Transformational Pathways, which is the story of, or which tells stories of people who have been associated with the Toastmasters organization, and through its ability to enable people to communicate better and to become leaders, have changed their own lives, and it's a beautiful thing. Finally, I want to quickly say thank you to Winnie, Caleb, Susan, Richard, Gary, and Kenny. Did I say your name already? If not, I'll say it again, for participating. Kenny, please do not dream of me as being mute anymore, because I don't want to lose my voice. And I sincerely hope that every one of you come back again next week. Mm-hmm. Give us your thoughts, your feedback, your stories. Be a part of the family.